Welcome everyone to the June 15th Police Advisory Commission meeting. We're going to start with a roll call. And because we have many new guests to our meeting, I've asked my colleagues to just introduce themselves a bit more fully than we usually do at our meeting. So I'm Rhonda Goldfein. I run the AIDS Law Project of Pennsylvania, and I live in Center City, Philadelphia. Next up, Sean Along.
Hi, my name is Sean Along, and I am a Temple University student studying legal studies.
Thank you, Sean. Mujib. Doesn't seem like he's unmuted yet.
I just clicked you, Mujib.
Oh, he's still muted. There you go.
He's good.
Okay. My name is Mujib Chaudhary. I'm a pharmacist by profession, and I live in the 2nd district, and also have a lot of friends and activity in the 25th district.
Thank you, Mujib. Commissioner Ben Geffen has an excused absence. Ben is an attorney with the Public Interest Law Center. Next up, George Mosey, our parliamentarian.
I'm George Mosey. I'm the executive director at the Philadelphia Anti-Drug and Violence Network. I grew up in West Philadelphia.
Thank you. Bilal, has Bilal joined us?
Don't see him.
I just texted him. I think he's running a little late.
All right, we'll get to the end of the roll call, and hopefully Bilal will be on. Michael Ramming.
Do not see Michael on right now.
Okay. Michael Wehrman.
Got him.
Hello. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Wehrman. I've been with the Police Advisory Commission since 2015. I've lived in Fishtown for 12 years now, and it's the 26th Police District. I'm happy to see so many people here.
Thank you. Sarah Young.
Hi, everyone. I'm a community development consultant living in Brewerytown, Philadelphia. I've worked most extensively with the Chinatown neighborhood, which is in the 6th district, and Brewerytown is in the 22nd.
Thank you. Has Bilal joined us? I don't think I see him. All right, we'll let Bilal introduce himself when he joins. So, as we know, it's been a tumultuous few weeks of heartbreak, outrage, and some inspiration in Philadelphia and the nation. And in memory of all those who have died as a result of police violence, let's have a moment of silence. You've heard from the introductions that the Police Advisory Commission is representative of the city. The commissioners are all volunteers who travel the city to convene monthly evening meetings, many of which have been impassioned. Some have been downright volatile. And we hear the pain and frustrations of our fellow Philadelphians, and we welcome the call for police reform and strengthening civilian oversight. And the clear message we're hearing from our elected officials, our community leaders, and the public is that oversight must be independent, transparent, and accountable to the city it serves. But for oversight to really work, it must also be resourced with sufficient funding and staffing. And it must have the authority and the power to do the job well, and the full cooperation of the administration. We remain ever hopeful that Philadelphia will get the reform and oversight it needs and deserves. Otherwise, these painful days will have been in vain. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the Police Advisory Commission's Executive Director, Hans Menos, for your report.
Hi, thank you, Rhonda. So for those of you who've been here before, I'm going to do something a little different today to make sure that we're all on the same page and just describing what the PAC does and what we've accomplished so far. So I'd like to highlight that some of our work to date has included what I feel is a very impressive body of work, but has focused on policy, practice, and custom. We do not typically investigate issues in the front line, and nor are we really empowered to do so. But I do recognize that that's what a lot of people want, and I'm hopeful that through the support of City Council, that we will be able to offer that, in the near future. So the PAC is focused on a few things. We have written a report, for instance, on body-worn cameras, which I think is on our which I know is on our website, and I encourage you all to review. And that focused on how the policy, practice, and customs issues that are present in there, and so have our other reports. There is another report, for instance, that we focused on with the arrest in 2018 of at the Starbucks in 2018. And what we felt contributed to that and how that could have been prevented in the future. In a similar vein, there was an elongated protest at the Mazzoni Center during one of their symposiums and one of their conferences, and we drafted a response to that highlighted how that response could have been improved, how the police response could have been improved. We did some excellent work on a similar response to the ICE protests that occurred in 2018 as well. Those are protests that, as the city might recall, went on for about a month and had several high-profile incidences held within that protest, including a couple of times that folks were moved. And the general sentiment was that the people were unsatisfied with how the police department treated them. We felt that it was our responsibility to respond to that and highlight what could have been improved and what we felt needed to be explained further to the public. So then there are other reports, but I do want to highlight a couple of the reports that I think are responsive to the idea now that we're dealing with when people say defund the police, right? It's a kind of a heavy, more nuanced conversation around defunding the police that people are having, but that in many ways the PAC has been having for years. And so when I hear defund the police, I hear fund other entities appropriately to do the job that we feel that they should be doing. So I'll point to a report that the PAC put out on PPD canine encounters. What we discovered in that report was that the police department is the only entity that can respond quickly and citywide to a dangerous dog that exists. And so as a result, we are sending police officers when someone calls 911 and says, there's a dangerous dog on my block or a dog is attacking somebody. But if we were to rethink that and reconceptualize that, as we highlighted in our report, there are other entities that should be funded more appropriately and should be supported appropriately to respond to dogs. And so we're not resolving these issues with guns, et cetera. And I highlight that as one example, but there's kind of a myriad of others in terms of mental health, juvenile justice issues, drug addiction issues that I know the police department agrees with, and that most folks intuitively understand we should probably not be sending police officers to. So I highlight the fact that our work has been responsive to some of these issues, as well as the overall issues of racism, sexism, and disproportionate contact that folks have had with the police department and have brought to us over the last almost 3 years. So, one of the questions that we often get is, what drives the policy, practice, and custom changes in the PPD? And that's a really complicated question, but I'll try and synthesize it here. And it really works in one of two distinct ways. One is that we, the police department of the PAC, agree on a problem. All right, so we agree this is an issue that needs to be resolved and changed because it's not working very well. And we work together to see where our interests align, what we agree on. That, for instance, is an ongoing project that we're having as it relates to the Police Board of Inquiry and that collaboration, that we agree that there needs to be some change in that process. And it's just about understanding how we define change and perhaps how they define change. But in other cases, we don't agree there's a problem. We have to highlight through our work product that why a problem exists. When we discuss the idea of the police response to self-help evictions, for instance, we have to really outline through using data and case studies why we believe the police on the ground were not responding appropriately to evictions that were not done legally. Ultimately, they agreed, as they often do when we make cases, or at least agree in part, and then we work together in some way, shape, or form to change the policy, improve the practice, or address the custom. And so those are good examples, and often our reports come with specific recommendations, which are often, but not always, agreed to and accepted. So it's like, as I mentioned, it's a lot more complicated than I just laid out, but those are the two kind of immediate avenues, and I'm happy to discuss that more and take questions on that. And if you have any questions, as Danny mentioned, feel free to use the raise your hand feature in the chat. Is that right, Danny? And then Danny will identify you for me.
It's, I believe, if you click on participants, if you're using a computer, I'm not sure how it works on the phone app, but on the app, if you click participants, you can click on your name and you can raise your hand. And you can also message me in the chat and I can lob those questions to Hans as well.
Great, thank you, Danny, for that. So, other questions that we receive is, what are the historical barriers to oversight and the change in policing? And so, here's another one that's really complicated, but I want to address it as quickly as I can in about 4 or 5 points. And I think we can probably pull out some more if we work together on that. But one of them is just generally and honestly some skepticism of the Police Advisory Commission. I received a great deal of that, and to some extent still do. What's our true mission? Are we more interested in damaging or criticizing police than helping? And are we more interested in headlines than actually creating change? And so that's a skepticism that people have that are really anyone outside of your entity. I can see that concern being present, but the police officers over the years have expressed in one way, shape, or form. And so that also speaks to the general idea of the culture of policing. It can be a very insular culture. I don't think that's a secret to anybody. And so the idea of outsiders it can often be viewed as threatening. And that's frankly who we are. As much as we try and be collegial, as much as we highlight that we're part of city government, we're not police officers. And to many of the officers that we deal with, that's dispositive. If you're not a police officer, then you shouldn't talk about policing. Is some of the stance that we received. So that's a culture issue that I think is not as ingrained as it maybe once was, but it's still present. There's some other issues for us, like lack of power. We don't always have the power to compel every document or every person to do what we want. And so that has been a challenge at times to really get all of the things that we need to get the evidence we need. And so, another challenge is evidence. All right, we can feel a certain way about police practice, but we have to be able to show them to go back to my other point, when they don't agree, we have to be able to show them and say, here's evidence that the practice or the policy that you're utilizing isn't functional or is problematic. And if we don't have that, then what it boils down to is an opinion, which is, it's difficult to change policy or change anything really by just providing an opinion. We need to have evidence based, and we talk about that at the PAC all the time. How important it is to have our recommendations in our work part be evidence based. And of course, I think if you asked any department head in the city, they'd say, "Oh, well, we need more funding." But certainly, we need more funding, right? And we need more resources in terms of staff especially if we're going to accomplish the goal of being a frontline investigator. So those are some of the historical barriers. There's probably about 15 more that I'm not highlighting, but I think they all are perfectly related to some of these issues. And so, as I said, if there are any questions, let me know. Danny, let me know. Feel free to stop me.
There was actually someone, Hans, someone asked, does the PAC have any say in police training? Okay,
so there are, the next area I was going to get to are some specific policies the PAC wants to impact, but I'll answer that question now. So the question is, do we have any role in police training? Is that right? Okay, so the short answer is yes. We can opine on virtually anything related to policing that we feel we have a role in, and that role is typically rooted in the idea if it affects the relationship between the police and the community, which is a lot of things. So in the past, we've weighed in on, and in our Starbucks report, this is really present, the idea of anti-racist and implicit bias training. And more recently, we've discussed the concept of training as it relates to the quality of stops and how we can improve the quality of street level stops through training, and the general idea of reality-based training and how it should be reconsidered. So, and we've also requested a lot of the non-mandatory training. So I'm not going to get into it now, but there's state level training that has to happen, and then there is a certain number of hours that is PPD driven, that not every municipal police officer in Pennsylvania has to get. So that area of training is what's considered the more flexible area of training that they could change if they want to. And so we've gotten access to that, and would welcome the opportunity to make more substantive recommendations around each individual training. But we've certainly weighed in, and we certainly can weigh in some more. I hope that answers the question. If it does not, please let Danny know, and we'll try it again.
A follow-up question was, all right, just lost it. Is there any evidence of efficiency for these trainings?
Yeah, so if we're talking, for instance, about implicit bias training, I'm not sure which training they're referring to, then the answer to that is no. I think that's a huge critique of that training nationwide, not just in Philadelphia, that we're not, either making the effort to assess the efficacy of the training, or that we have been unable in jurisdictions that have tried it to actually point to a real cause and effect. And so I think that, as I understand it, and I could be incorrect about this, that there is no direct metric that they're utilizing to understand, is training effective? So is our reality-based training regarding a use of force effective? Is it actually lowering use of force? I don't think any of that research is being done right now, but certainly not as it relates to the implicit bias training, which I think is, as I mentioned already, one of the most often talked about in the world of oversight and in policing critiques of that particular training.
Another sort of follow-up question, Hans, which I think you might have answered a little bit, but sort of on topic. Somebody asked, if anti-racist is actively working against racist policies, what does anti-racist training mean in regards to police?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm really happy you asked it. Who asked that question?
Their name is Rob.
Okay, thank you, Rob. So I think that is an awesome question, because what we actually recommended was anti-racist training and practice. So anti-racist training would be, for instance, telling the police officers to understand the world within they police, right? And that's juxtaposed against implicit bias training that says, understand what's about you that could be biased, as opposed to understand what's about the world that could be racist. And helping officers first make that distinction is number one, but then second, moving that into being action-oriented. So I'll use Starbucks as an example of a training scenario that they could have used. They walk into a cafe, there's a cafe that they may or may not know is typically an open space where you don't have to buy anything. There's two black young men there who are being asked to leave, and they are telling you this is a racist incident. Taking a breath, stopping, and determining, am I being utilized by a racist person or a biased person to meet an end that I don't want to be a part of? Are these young men correct, and are they experiencing this disproportionately in a way that another white person would not have experienced it? And then making decisions, even if that decision ultimately is I still have to do my job, at least understanding that. And moreover, as it relates to practice, and I promise I'll stop, Rob, bringing that back and having a conversation within the district and with the other police officers to say, this is my decision making on this. What do you think of that? This is what I heard when I went to this call. Is this appropriate? Should I be doing things differently? And this is to their supervisor. And really debriefing that and unpacking that. And I know I sound like a social worker now, because that's what I am, but that is what anti-racist practice is, so that it's really living it and doing it and thinking about how you're going to do your job in a way that doesn't perpetuate racism. And to your point, Robin, a great point, that pushes back against it and actively works against it. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge for anybody in any industry, and is certainly a challenge for police officers. But it's I think if we can rethink that and reconceptualize that, would be a real move in the right direction. And I think would also move away from the idea that all we have to do is sit in a classroom, learn a couple of things, and we'll be way better. It's an ongoing assessment period, is what I'm trying to say. Did that answer your question, Rob? Anything to make you stop talking, Hans.
And another question, Hans, sort of on the same topic. It's actually two questions. They would like to know what is being done to work on implicit bias, and also what is being done to ensure that officers are getting to know the communities they serve in.
Yeah. So I'll say this, right? I'm not in charge of the police department, but so I'll tell you what I'm aware of, and then they might say, there's a couple other things you're missing, Hans. But in terms of implicit bias, I first want to say that I don't know that we can fully identify that as the source of the problem, so to speak, to the extent that we can call it a problem. But yes, there is, as I understand it, and I'm not sure where budget cuts leave this, a training that is being developed that discusses how we can improve implicit bias training implicit bias responses in the police department. That training, when I last checked, was going to be delivered by Dr. Bryant Marks, who has experience. He's a Morehouse College professor of psychology, who, if it matters, is trained in Michigan, and has experience training the LAPD amongst other police departments. I don't know who else, but definitely the largest police department is the LAPD. So he will be delivering that training. This is, again, pre-budget cuts for the police department. There are a myriad of programs and efforts that are designed to engage the community. I think that part of our critique of that would be really helping the police department understand a more targeted approach to that. So, and I'll give you an example. If the police department does a karaoke event, right? And then they do a coffee with a cop event. Are they differentiating why they're doing the event, so what they're trying to get out of that event? Are they preparing their officers to answer questions at that event, to be engaging at that event? And engagement, I'll drill down on. I've seen events that are meant to be engagement events where police officers are speaking to themselves and residents are speaking to themselves. And so it's almost like if you have toddlers, like parallel play situation where you're like, why aren't they talking to each other? And that is, and sorry, I have toddlers, that's my best example. And so, really improving the quality of those things. So I guess what I'll say is there's a lot of them. There's a ton of events that are make people that are designed to engage the community. There's foot beats that are used from time to time. There's bike patrols that are used in communities, all with the idea that police can be more accessible. And there's a general direction and mandate and guidance. The police try and do this. They try and get to know their folks. There's some effort to make sure that there are officers who are tasked with community engagement that day, so they're not chasing radio calls all the time, or they have significant breaks in their day, so they're not chasing radio calls. So they can, and that's an improvement and a smart one, right? So we don't, if you're a cop and you're just constantly responding to 911 calls, and then you're exhausted at the end of your shift, and someone says to you, why didn't you build community today? You're going to say exactly that. Well, I wasn't assigned that. I was assigned to radio calls all day. So I'll say this. I think that's a great question. That's what I'm generally aware of. There's probably a lot more that I'm missing from the police department. And I encourage everyone else, if you have the opportunity, when you see a police officer, to ask them, what are you guys doing? They'll probably have a good answer for you. So I'm going to keep going through the agenda, but I love the questions. Feel free to throw them at me when they come in.
Sorry.
Hans, I'll give you a moment's break.
Sure.
And ask Bilal to introduce himself. I believe Bilal has joined us.
Yeah, let me just grab him. And actually,
Okay.
Michael
Ramming also
is just jumping on. Let me find Bilal. Sorry. Here we go. Bilal, you should be unmuted now.
Bilal, if you'd be kind enough, just introduce yourself to everyone.
Bilal Khayyam, member of the commission.
Thank you.
And let me find, I just saw Michael Ramming just joined. Here we go.
Wait, he's muted.
Yep, hold on.
Okay.
There we go. Michael,
Hey.
you
I'm unmuted. Hey guys, how are you? How's everybody?
Hey, Mike.
Nice
Hey.
to see you.
Likewise. Are we free to ask questions now, or are we just going through? I had a question very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead, man. What do you got?
So, like, it's been my experience, like, especially with how police are engaged with handling, issues with implicit bias, racism, white supremacy, things of that sort. Is how they're engaged with other facets of, like, city government. So every so often you'll see a situation where there's a meeting of some sort in the community with a city council person, some other elected official, and to my understanding, a lot of it gets turned into not all cops are bad. The language ends up turning into that. And it's troubling in that as an organization, that the Philadelphia Police Department is incapable of self-correcting, right? And so even if you have people who come in from, various sources, you'll have like astute people come in and try to do implicit bias training, which I did like when you outlined, you gave those items a few minutes ago. It ends up turning into this conversation about not all police are bad. And my concern is that if they are championed in that way by city officials, is that signaling to them that they're doing a good job in reaching, like, is the outcomes of those types of meetings the types of things that they're using to say that we're making grounds in that regard? Because if so, it's woefully inaccurate, right? Like, the argument isn't that all police are bad, given the way that a lot of African-American communities come out to support the police. So it's evident that we don't all think that they're bad. We just want you to do what's morally and ethically responsible in terms of getting rid of certain officers who step over the line and reduce and eradicate the culture that intimidates officers who try to speak up about it.
Yeah, I mean, so to the extent that I can answer for city leaders, right? I think that there is this general belief that the good employees of the police department need a morale boost, right? And I think that's what I chalk that up to when I hear folks in city leadership say or remind us all of all the good things that police officers do. And honestly, it doesn't necessarily bother me when I hear that. I do think that, to your point, there needs to be an immediate summary, such as yours, that says, but no one's suggesting that they're all bad. No one's suggesting that. What we're talking about is misconduct and culture. What we're talking about is how we address the issues that do come up effectively, and again, make it a safe space or safe place or safe workplace for those good ones that we believe exist to speak out confidently against the small number, if we have to say it out loud, of not good officers. So I hear what you're saying, and I hear your frustration. I think that a lot of people share that frustration.
Andre, Chief Dorsey said that she'd be willing to chat too. You want to?
Well, please. So I want to, while you do that, we have someone here named Santi. That is a real police uniform. That is actually Chief Inspector Dorsey, who I'm a big fan of, and I thank her for joining this meeting. And so I suspect the chief is going to correct some of the things that I missed on my summary of police responses. But please, without further ado, thanks for joining us, Chief.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not going to correct you because I'm here to listen. And sometimes that's one thing that police officers don't do, because I think, I mean, I'm an American woman, and I've grown up in North Philadelphia. I've lived right now in Elkins Park, but I've only lived there for 9 years of my life. The most part of my life, I grew up in North Philadelphia. I moved to Olney, and so, you know, and I have a son who is 28 years old. And so the dichotomy of that is that on the one hand, I'm a police officer, and on the other hand, I'm a citizen, I'm a mother, and I'm very, very, I think, invested in making things better for, you know, between the police officers and the community. And so this is, I think, the first PAC meeting that I've come to. So I'm very, very, I'm taking notes, I'm listening. And if anyone has any questions that they want to ask me, I'll be more than willing to answer as best as I can. One of the things that resounded with me is, I think, justice, that folks want justice, and we want good police officers. We know they're good police officers, but what I'm hearing is when a police officer does something wrong, steps out of line, that you want that officer held accountable. And we as police officers want the same thing. Another thing that resounded within me, and I mean, I've been on this police force for 36 years, so probably older than some of you are, but I grew up during the Frank Rizzo era. I came on during the Sandborn era. I witnessed the second move event. And so I've seen some things, and I know that we have gotten better, but we have a long way to go. So another thing that resounded with me is implicit bias. And so I know about Lori Fredon, and I know about her work. And so I think the thing is that there needs to be change. There needs to be dialogue. We need to talk about things that we're uncomfortable talking about. And for some of us, it is very, very, still very uncomfortable. And sometimes we don't know exactly what to say to the public. We get a lot of, in Philadelphia, I get a lot of support. We get a lot of love and support from people. And at the end of the day, we are not different when we put on this uniform, or we take this uniform off, than anyone else is. And so if someone that I know, or if I'm walking down the street, because I've been stopped by police officers, if I'm driving my car, if I'm walking down the street, if my neighbor or my someone in my family or my friends are, do encounter police, that it's a positive encounter, that they feel they've been treated fairly and they've been treated with dignity. So, in my role for external services, it really is more community engagement. It is not community relations, which relegates a certain unit of the police department to engage or to support police efforts as far as in, dealing with programs. I'm more involved in community engagement. I work very, very closely with the Asian American community, but I work with all communities, and I feel that right now there is a lack of connectedness. And that's why I'm happy that the PAC and some other Asian American groups, and I'd like to see the community at large work together to work on problems so that we're connected and we're working towards the same goal, and that, we're working with the police. As far as changes and defunding the police, I don't know what that's going to look like. For me, the number one concern is safety. And so if the police are not doing certain things that we do a lot of things. Hans, I think you touched on it. We provide a lot of functions. Mental health. If someone has a substance abuse problem, we're called. If there's a barking dog or a dangerous animal, we're called. If there's a deer gets loose, we're called. We are called for hospital cases. We're called for runaway children. And we are not just a crime fighting machine. However, when we're fighting violence, a lot of the things that we would like to do, we are chasing the 911 system. We would like to get out and talk and engage more, but we're so involved with critical incidents, such as sometimes shooting and violence, and also the way we're portrayed on the media, that the officer on the street, as it stands now, may be overwhelmed. And so you have, it's like, I'm going to give it, I don't want to trivialize it, but writing reports. If I'm only writing a one-page report, then my report writing skills go bad. They either go bad or they're not as good. So when I come to write a long report, I have to really apply myself and remember the things that I was taught. It is the same thing with any communication. If I'm asking somebody, were you robbed? What did the person look like? Which way did they go? What weapon did they have? But we need to be out in the communities, and we need the time to engage with people before they're in trouble or before there's a troublesome encounter with police, so that we need to really, really stay on top of our communication skills, and also so that we're just not thinking that we're a force that comes into the community to make arrests and to stop people. But we are there to actually prevent crime, to make you feel safe, and especially for young people and senior citizens, if you need to speak to the police, then don't be afraid. Don't be afraid that something's bad's gonna happen to you, because you need a police officer to help you. And we also need to do some things better. We need to learn how to, I think, communicate better and engage and do things in more of a social way for people of all ages. I'm just not talking about adolescents or older people, but we're missing some things because we're chasing a dragon. We're chasing a hydra. We're chasing something with maybe 8 heads on it. And we're asked to make so many hats that engagement piece is the piece that's really the rapport and the relationships that we have in our own neighborhoods. We need to carry that, allow officers to slow down and to think and to practice those skills and make those skills, that skill set that leads the public to trust us. We really, really need to allow our officers to work on that. And we need to talk about, we need to have these dialogues. What it means when the community is torn apart.
Right.
When the community suffers from shootings and violence, there's trauma in communities. So how do you come into those communities, working with you and working with other folks, to actually heal not only the police community, but to heal that community.
Yeah, so and Chief, I want to thank you for that, for those words. I think that that's great leadership, and I appreciate you coming to our meeting and expressing that. And I also want to just take the time to thank you. I know Sarah and I have been working with you on a couple of projects. One of them related to some of the immediate anti-Asian bias in Philadelphia around COVID, and your leadership there was really appreciated. So I really thank you for showing up today. And it's a good example of what we can work on together, again, when we agree there's a problem.
We had some questions for Chief Dorsey, if that's okay, Hans?
Sure. Why don't I run through a couple more things and we'll circle back to the questions? Is that all right? I just want to make sure that we're on track and we get through, because there's a prescribed Q&A period. So sure. I do want to do both. So I'll just talk quickly about the specific policies the PAC does want to impact. And one of those is use of force. We recently submitted some recommendations about one area of use of force, and that's specifically about how police officers document when they either draw or point their weapon, their firearm. We believe that should be documented as a use of force. I think if anyone here had a gun pulled on them, they might consider that to be force. And so we submitted some recommendations around that. I think that there's a lot more that we can do to highlight to improve not only use of force, but the use of force review period or policy. So I think we're looking forward to more discussion on that. Obviously, I mentioned already body-worn cameras. I'm a strong proponent of body-worn cameras, and I believe that the way that they're utilized could be really rethought here in Philadelphia. And I mean specifically as it relates to the audit of that footage. We don't have an ongoing audit here in Philadelphia, and I think it could be very useful to understand policy and practice issues, and again be rolled into training. Event review. The review that we see here in Philadelphia is often based on finding fault or finding mistakes and not lessons learned. That's a whole different model. And so we've submitted recommendations that really ask the police department to start to consider when events, whether they're high profile or micro events, occur that are problematic, that there's an effort to review them without looking. I mean, someone might be at fault, but trying to understand where the systemic failures are, where they call catastrophic failures are, and really utilizing a medical review or a aviation model that looks at problems in that way, which is really about preventing them in the future. And so we are very, very interested in making sure that the police department consider event review as opposed to just review for punitive purposes. Internal investigations, most folks who've heard me talk about this in the past, I think there's an opportunity to make these investigations more transparent and to limit the classification of internal to a small number of cases. And just for clarification, an internal investigation is an investigation that the residents, the PAC, and the press, of course, cannot see, cannot review, and are not told about. And in my opinion, there are far too many internal investigations that exist in the police department. And for context, some of these investigations are internal because they can be, as opposed to because they need to be. There's nothing being protected, for instance, or there's nothing damaging that could occur. They are just internal because the police department believes that they are entitled to make things internal based on the way that they learn about them. Transparency in general, but specifically transparency in releasing of visual evidence. Residents of the city may have noticed that we don't often see body-worn camera footage of the Philadelphia Police Department. If you're wondering why we rarely see that footage, it's because they have a policy that says that they don't release footage. That is very behind other police departments, which have a very, very scheduled process of releasing footage to the public when it's requested for the sake of transparency. And so I think we need to get with the times on that, frankly, and catch up to our other cities that we're often seeing body-worn camera footage coming at us. If there are any questions now, maybe we can take a break here, and then after that, I will do a quick summary, I promise, of just about 6 current projects that we're working on. So, Dan, you said there were some questions?
Yeah, there were a few for Chief Dorsey, and there was one for us. Specifically, did you have an order you wanted to do those in?
Well, why don't you ask all the Chief Dorsey questions now, real quick? I don't want to turn this into, I want to put the chief on the spot and so if you have any, why don't you ask those real quick, if you can?
Okay, sure. So let me just roll through. What metrics are police being evaluated in terms of the efficiency of these programs, and how do police? Hold on, sorry. Are police trained? One of the specific, sorry, I was just reading all these. One of the specific questions was, are cops trained on and prepared to handle things that you mentioned, like the mental health and homelessness, et cetera? Like, what is the training like for that?
And you're invited here to answer questions. So if you want to keep it brief, feel free, and we'll circle back if you want to get other folks to update.
All right, as far as mental health training, we have what's called crisis intervention training, CT training, where, officers are trained, by and outside entity. They're giving training on how to engage people who may have mental health problems. So they are trained in that. They're trying to get more officers trained, but we do have training for that. Many people who have substance abuse problems also have mental health issues and vice versa. So we do train our officers to do that.
Chief Dorsey, police frequently say they want community to work for them, but I never hear police say we want to work with the community. This nuance may drive the defund the police movement because it puts control in the hands of the community and not police, who are generally not the vested community members. How do we change this framing and power balance?
Well, that's a loaded question, but sometimes there's, when the police and the community gets together, sometimes things happen. I've been working with community groups for a long time, for over 20 years, maybe 25 years. And there's a dynamic. On the one hand, sometimes we have ways that we do things. We have policies and procedures, and we're very, I guess, organized. And sometimes that expectation of authority that the public has of us sometimes interferes with our interactions. Like when I deal with a group and I'll ask them, well, what do you think? I'm looking for answers. And sometimes the answer that we get back is, well, what do you think, Chief Dorsey? Or what do you think, Officer so-and-so? And I'll give my opinion, but what I really want sometimes, I feel that at the grassroots, each resident or each neighborhood or each group has the answers, but some up to problems that are going on in the neighborhoods. I look for suggestions, and I try to balance it between realistically what we can do. And I think at my level, what I look at my role as a change agent. So maybe we have a policy, maybe we have a practice on the way we do things, but it could work better if we do it this way. So we want community input, but sometimes because people look at us as authority, they say, well, what are you going to do about it? And so, or maybe they're intimidated, but getting people to actually know that I don't have to empower you. This is your community. You know what's best. You know what you need. You know what you want. Sometimes we have things that are in place and we actually work together with the community, let them know what's available to them. Sometimes we have to create things. I would rather not be the one to tell, this is what you need, or this is what you're going to get. I always ask, well, what do you think you should do?
Well, I think
another thing that I think happens is that sometimes police we have this idea in our head that what we're doing is okay and it should work. So just to slow down and to listen and to actually have those dialogues with people, you know, it doesn't have to be a crime issue. It could be a community issue. It could be anything. So if I'm going to develop a relationship with someone, I'm going to listen. I'm going to actually actively listen to them. I'm going to let them know I don't have all the answers, but I'd like to come up with something working with you so that you take ownership in it. When you come give someone an idea or they come back with an idea, if it comes from within the community, buy-in is going to be better. And so it is sometimes just the person who knows how to listen, but not only that, to touch that power within the community and to say, listen, we work together. I'm not going to be the one telling you, but I can advise you on what we have. And so to marry it so that we are getting the best bang for our buck and that people walk away feeling that the police listen to them, and also not just walking away from something. Sometimes building a relationship may take weeks, it may take months, it may take years. So being patient. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Chief Dorsey. We appreciate your answers. We appreciate you allowing us to put you on the spot just a bit. Hans, do you want to quickly go through the final projects, and then we want to open it up to make sure that folks who haven't had an opportunity to ask a question or make a comment have that chance?
Okay. Yes, that sounds like a good idea. Okay, so I'll quickly go through our current work, what we're focusing on. And if there's any questions about that, just let me know. So as everyone knows, we are in June. We are just about a year out from June 2019, when the Plainview Project outlined about 320 active police officers that were posting racist, homophobic, sexist, and religiously bigoted, as well as violent comments on their Facebook page. One of our analysts has worked incredibly hard on this and has built not only a database internally that helps us understand how to categorize these, but has learned a great deal about the police department's investigation and what they've done. And so we are in the middle of attempting to get more access to more information, which we're hopeful is forthcoming. And we hope to have a report for the police department in the near future. I can't give a timeline now because I'm not sure when we will get information, but just wanted to let everyone know that we're still working on that and trying to understand the granular issues that were present in that investigation and report back. As I mentioned already, another project that we're working on and submitted to the police department is the classification of a use of force related to when a firearm is pointed or pulled. And we're looking forward to hearing more about that, those recommendations from the police department. We focus in general on officer wellness and have been working on a report related to officer wellness within the police department. And so this we felt was an important thing to take on because many residents in the city diagnose why they feel they were mistreated. And often that diagnosis is the officer was unwell, mentally unwell. They were stressed. They had other issues that were going on. So that was number one, but also it's just an intuitive problem. The police see things in our neighborhood in our communities that are really problematic and really traumatizing. And we wanted to be clear about how that was being addressed. And so we we discussed, we're discussing officer wellness in that vein and how we can increase the wellness of the officers in the street so that officers' wellness, mental wellness, doesn't affect the relationship between the police and the community. Recruiting, that's responsive to a lot of concerns, but most notably one of the comments here that refer to the idea that there's not enough community members, that police officers that represent the community or that understand the community, and that's often how it's discussed in terms of recruiting. But there's another good point as it relates to recruiting, which is the idea that the police department should consider that more holistically and consider what their actions in terms of stop and frisk or other community level actions are actually tainting their recruitment pool. And I think this is something that they understand on some level, that if the relationship doesn't improve between police and community, and there's a high number of stops or activities or interactions that leave a bad taste in someone's mouth, are they going to want to join your ranks when they become of age or not? And so having that kind of more holistic conversation, as well as understanding how we can break down barriers like physical fitness. So everything from the kind of more tangible problems to the more theoretical kind of tainting the applicant pool are contained within that project. We just received back and publicized our GVI report, our Group Violence Intervention Report, where we made several recommendations about how to prevent the violation of civil liberties and how to make sure that this report doesn't do what I just highlighted. This practice doesn't do what I highlighted, which is alienate, unnecessarily stop, unnecessarily incarcerate, and otherwise have a negative effect on the community. And we look forward to collaborating with the police department, the ACLU, and the Quattrone Center on how we can implement some of those recommendations. I mentioned that the police department agrees with our assessment of the Police Board of Inquiry, and we are collaboratively working with them on how to make that process better, how to improve it. So we're looking forward to that. Last year, we submitted, crafted, and recommended a mediation program. That was accepted by the police department, and we are currently working on how to make that reality, especially given everyone's budget cuts. And we are working on auditing the complaints against police, the database, the completed complaints against police that we received back from the police department, to understand what common themes and build some data off of the complaints against police that we've received, and trying to focus on why complaints aren't resolved or found sustained, and any other data trends that we can find there. So those are some of our current ongoing projects. There's a few more that are kind of more in their infancy or just conversations, but that's what we are hoping to provide in the coming year for the folks in the city. So with that.
Thank you, Hans. We'll turn it over to public comment.
We had one question already from earlier that you may want to touch on, Hans, which is, how is the PAC helping to build community trust in the police, which is necessary to carry out any of the reform work / practices being proposed?
Yeah, so the community trust is an important factor, and so just to drill down on that, what we really need is for the police to be viewed as legitimate, right? And so folks see them as an entity that they can trust, but also that that has the authority to tell them not to do something or to stop doing something. So it's often referred to as kind of procedural justice and police legitimacy, right? And so part of that is focusing on the procedural justice, helping the police department understand that the way you do things matters. And so the quality of a stop is just as important, if not more important, than the constitutionality of it. And often our conversation is really about that constitutionality. That's what we talk about. Was the officer allowed to stop you? Is the officer allowed to pull you over and engage you? But what we want to expand that conversation, and we have expanded that conversation to say, well, while they're there, are they telling you honestly and openly why they're there? Is it a pretextual stop? Is the stop Is the officer unnecessarily cursing at you, etc.? So I think to summarize what I'm trying to say is highlighting how doing things in a procedurally just way helps people gain confidence in you. When you show up to an eviction and you handle it appropriately, how much people are inspired by that, and how much the granular kind of smaller parts of the police department interaction with the city really does affect the larger things within them. So we try and focus on those things and highlight how they can have an overall impact on community.
Another question, Hans, that was asked was in terms of disciplining bad cops. As they understand it, if a cop gets disciplined, often the union can reverse that discipline. For example, rehiring a fired officer. Do you think there are ways around the union or to fix this issue?
Well, it's a great question. So first, let me say the union can't reverse it. They can grieve it and in fact reverse it. But it's not like they're the arbiter and they reverse it. So I'm not saying that the question is suggesting that. And so make sure it's clear the union is advocating for it to be reversed, not necessarily being the reverser. And yes, they often win. And often police officers who a police commissioner feels should not have their job get their job back. And that has been a challenge nationwide, but especially here in Philadelphia. I think there's certainly parts of that about the arbitration process that need to be done at the state level and need to be done and that we can't do anything about. But I do think that there's not enough conversation in the city about how due process and appropriate discipline and thoughtful and thorough investigations can lead to more of these disciplinary hearing issues being upheld. So I mentioned the Plainview Project. That is one of the issues there, frankly, that I'm suspecting exists, that the charging and the investigation, and certainly the charging, may not have been thorough and thoughtful enough to uphold discipline. So we can certainly focus on other parts outside of the city that are at the state level in terms of Act 111, but I would advise the police department and the residents of the city to also talk a lot about what we are not doing very well here, and really maximize our ability to discipline officers. And I don't know that that's being maximized right now.
I want to encourage folks, in addition to submitting questions to Danny, if you want to make a comment, there's a feature to do that, and we will unmute you and let you make your comment.
It actually looks like Majib wanted to say something. I'm going to unmute you, Majib.
Great.
Okay, thank you. The couple of things which I wanted to share in 2 or 3 minutes. First of all, I'm thankful that all we are okay with coronavirus. All our members are fine, but we should keep on praying for the other members of the attack, our city and our country. Second part is concerning with the police. As we have been listening for many time, there are bad people everywhere in the society, in all organizations. There are certain coroners who have been fired. There are the doctors who are writing narcotics. There are bad people everywhere. Only thing is our responsibility, if we can do something about the police. When the police is doing investigation for the police, I really very much doubtful that has to be done with some other identity. As we are talking right now at this time, that the city is talking about Oversight Commission, those kind of people have to be involved in those things. In my 8 years, I haven't seen any cop who has done something wrong and they went to their union, and Mr. Namzi, all the time I've seen it, they are reinstated. There should be some system that if they do 1, 2, 3 times, they should be fired for good. The police commissioner should have the authority to fire those officers who have done this thing many times. There are certain people who have done it 17 times and they're still in the police force. These are the important things which the people are looking at this time. We're talking the Black Lives Matter, that's good. But what I see it, that anybody who has been done injustice has to be taken care of this part. Justice for all. And we're talking about supreme justice, which everybody is involved in the city. No doubt there is certain nationality which are having this big issue, but in general with the police, we have issue all the time. Whichever color we have, we are still having a problem. So for these things, I have these two suggestions that the police, their union, they have to be rechecked. They are important because the army, they don't have no union. FBI have no union. CIA have no union, and they're taking care of us. Why the police have to have the union? They are essential people, and they should be having no union or some union to a level that they're not going to challenge just to look for the rights where they are being not given to them is fine, but it has gone too far at this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mujib. And I think when we talk about police reform, we need to be thinking about the collective bargaining agreement and how we hold all folks accountable. Danny, you have more questions, comments?
I do. Sorry, I'm just passing some along. One of them was, can you discuss Act 111 specifically?
Does anyone want to do that? Does anyone feel comfortable discussing Act 111?
Briefly, Act 111 is a state law that supports the collective bargaining agreement that creates the strength in the union and other activities that folks have been talking about. I think that we have on our website a review of Act 111 for more detail. So maybe we can get Danny to put that into the chat if he's not otherwise occupied, the link to the website.
Yes, I can find that.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Sorry, Hans, were you about to say something?
I was about to ask the same question. Are there any
okay.
Comments, questions? Anything else?
I don't see any other ones in the chat, and no one seems to be raising their hand.
Question, Danny, is that right?
Oh, actually, someone just asked, they were wondering if community is going to be involved in the GVI.
So the question is the community going to be involved in the GVI, in the Group Violence Intervention Program? I honestly can't speak to the GVI program. I think that there is that's a separate department in terms of the Violence Reduction Initiative. I believe, based on what I know about it, that there's an effort to ensure that community members are engaged, but I don't know to what extent or how.
Angelica said she could speak on it. I just
She's still muted. There she is.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Angelica Hendricks. I'm a policy analyst with the PAC. So I audited the PAC's GVI report, where we pretty much compared other jurisdictions to see what procedural protections they have to make sure that, you know, the system, this initiative isn't really pretty much kind of like a revitalized focused deterrence effort, which was in the city between 2013 and 2016. And so part of our recommendations, one of our recommendations was for the stakeholders to involve the community in all planning phases of GVI. So for our press release today for the report, we were asking for anyone, if they want to make any comments, make any suggestions or ideas about what type of protections they want to see in their communities and their neighborhoods about GVI, to please email the PAC, and that's pac@phila.gov.
Okay, well, thank you, Angelica. That's a great response. Appreciate that. Are there any other questions?
I just sent you one, Hans, as well.
Okay, I have, why do police feel they need qualified immunity? Police need to be held accountable for their actions just like everybody else. So I'll ask the folks here to tell me if I butcher qualified immunity, but it's generally the practice that if a public employee cannot be held liable personally for their behavior on the job while working, so long as they do not violate the law while working. Is that generally correct? Did I do a good enough job on qualified immunity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, huh?
Like Sean has a question.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just finish this. I just want to identify for folks before I answer the question. And so I think the idea is that this is generally a practice, and for a job like a police officer or a firefighter, where the risk of hurting somebody or taking a life is higher, that they need to be protected from losing their own personal assets because of a mistake that they might make on the job, and that mistake, if it's done while they're trying to accomplish their job, should be covered by their employer. I hear what a lot of folks are saying, and this kind of goes into the next question, if I'm hearing this correctly, which is why are taxpayers constantly footing the bill for folks who are acting improperly and being sued by residents of the city? I understand, and I don't necessarily disagree that it's problematic that officers who are acting inappropriately are covered, so to speak. It's just it's a general practice that I think is designed, and maybe doesn't always accomplish this, to ensure that a public employee isn't losing their house or their car or their assets because of a mistake that the state or the city put them in a position to make. Does that answer your question? I think so. You can't respond, so I hope it answers your question. I do see G. Lamar Stewart has a question. Oh, what happens? Oh, I'll read it for you. Sorry. What happens if the police do not follow the PAC's recommendation? So this is an important point to highlight. The police are not compelled to follow recommendations. What they'll typically do, but not always, is highlight why they feel the recommendation is not suitable, is not valid, or is not doable. And they'll typically say that they feel that they accomplish what we're trying to accomplish already through another practice. What we're recommending is perhaps a good idea, but because of funding, not possible, or that they want to move it to some time later in the future, or that they just disagree that what we want is a good idea for the department for a reason that they will typically list. And finally, of course, there's a kind of regular tension and push and pull about over processing the department. So infusing too much process into their work. So if we say we want a form for each eviction, they'll say we can't give every radio call its form. We'll have 1,000 forms, you know? So there's a lot of reasons, but effectively they can say no, and our only hope is and desire is that they fully consider the recommendation enough to articulate a really thoughtful reason why they are not doing it.
Someone wanted to speak. Hold on, I was going to mute them. Lamar?
Yes.
Hey guys, how are you? G. Lamar Stewart. That actually wasn't my question. I don't know how that was sent over. Nonetheless, just wanted on behalf of DA Krasner and our entire team at the DA's office, just salute the work that you and the PAC are doing. We have two members of our team that's on the line as well, Adriana Bearfield and Rayshawn Abdullah, who's been listening to the conversation. So if you have a question, just wanted to just give that comment. Thank you for your work, and we look forward to continue to support the PAC and the work that you guys are doing in the community and around police accountability. Well,
thank you, G. Lamar. We appreciate your partnership. I apologize for prescribing that question to you. It came over in the same chat, so I now see it's a different question. So thank you for clarifying. But yes, the DA's office has been a great partner, and I think that we look forward to partnering with you all more as well. So thank you very much.
Sean, you had a question?
Yes. I want to know is there any way that the PAC can also get oversight over the FOP?
Yeah. Well,
only because there's a lot of internal stuff going there that is like hush, and I think we need to have full authority to see what's going on.
yeah, so Sean, I hear you on that. The FOP is an incredibly problematic organization, and I think that their communications around a lot of issues leave us all dumbfounded. And I think in many cases, if they speak for their officers, and they really do speak volumes, and I'll say that, unfortunately, they're a private entity. They're not even a city agency. So there's no oversight the city can have about them at all. And as just kind of a more, like a larger issue, they are a union, right? And so we're supposed to like unions. I think that this is just a union run amok, frankly. I don't want it to be thought as the idea that we don't think unionship is okay. But this particular union run by this particular person is incredibly problematic, and I hear you on the frustration with that. I wish someone could do more. It's not us though. Danny, do you have another? Oh, do you have a question, Danny? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I sent it to you actually.
Okay. Oxford University did a study released last year that found police misconduct spreads like a virus. If the broken windows theory of policing is correct, that minor infractions grow larger and larger, how do ingrained the police culture the lack of accountability that leads to less? All right, I'm not sure if I understand the second part of the question. So do you want to unmute that person and see if they can ask the question?
Yeah, it was Rob.
Okay, sorry, Rob. I don't think I got it.
I mean, my question was, if in police academies and whatnot, the broken windows theory is like treated like some sort of like gospel that we must, stop this and this grows. And so if we could understand that philosophy there, how do we then, when we see that police misconduct spreads like a virus, which was also found on a study, just like broken windows is based on a study that was published in the Atlantic, how do we then ingrain that into police culture, that not recognize that, not snipping, putting a police misconduct, snipping that in the bud, that lack of accountability leads to less legitimacy, less effectiveness, and less dignity really in a police officer's purpose? Like, how do we instill that, ingrain that into police culture?
Yeah, Rob, that's a great question, a big one. So first, let me say you kind of woke my inner nerd. So I'm going to just very quickly highlight a couple of things that you said. One is that broken windows theory was based on a study. You said it correctly in your chat. It's a theory, which is an important distinction, right? So a study says I prove something. A theory says I think I know something, right? Yes. Moreover, the idea here behind broken windows policing has, I think, in many ways been corrected in that it's supposed to be an identification of disorder and not necessarily a uniform call to meet disorder with force and arrest. And so that's a huge difference between how it's come down to us through kind of the pipeline. And so an actual broken windows theory addressing of disorder would be to say, well, the disorder I'm seeing now is homelessness or drug addiction or mental illness. As a police officer, let me lean on my partners in those three other arenas to come and address this, and not this is what we've heard from a lot of the simplification of this, which is that, and so as a police officer, I will address this. So I will try and, before this meeting is over, put in the chat a really great response to broken windows policing that kind of debunks this along the lines that I'm trying to do now. Probably not as well. But I do think that you're making a really great point that, and this is an actual study, right? So there is study by, I think, Andrew Papachristos and a few others that have done like social network analyses and done that. And we highlight this in our GVI report, done that both for GVI, so for group violence, but also have applied it to police officers. And have found that, to your point, one bad police officer is typically linked in an analysis in a social network to other bad police officers, kind of lending to your theory or to their theory and their study that it spreads from person to person, much like we've identified that violence can spread from person to person. So, to your point, it's not, it kind of flips this bad apples idea on its head and really highlights why it's really important to A, get early intervention, so we see cops who are next to a bad cop, a 20-year bad cop, and get to them early and explain to them where we see their trajectory going, but also to get rid of that bad cop. It's about the fact that they spoiled the bunch, right? And so I'll leave you all with this, just to respond to this in one final thing. One thing that we laugh about over at the PAC is that people say, well, that cop, he's not like the other cops. He's just a bad apple, all right? Which misses the entire analogy that the bad apple spoils the bunch, right? Which is what you're trying to say. So I agree with you so much that it's really important to get the bad apple because it'll spoil the bunch. And we have research that suggests that. And I think that is a direction that we have to go in. We have to really make it clear why it's so important for accountability on the front end and the back end to exist. So thanks for your question, Rob. I hope I answered that. Hope I didn't pontificate too much there.
There was one question, another one, Hans, that might be a good one to sort of close on. If anyone, where did it go? Sorry. Their question is about the newly formed Civilian Police Oversight Commission. How will this be unique from the PAC?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I don't know the intricacies of it, and the reality is that no one does, right? The City Council has decided that they're going to introduce a bill which will put this as a ballot question in the fall. I know there's not a lot of things ironed out, so what I do know is that the major difference is that A, we will know it will be in the city charter. Right now we exist by executive order, and that executive order can change from mayor to mayor, or even within the same administration, based on the mayor's will. The second is that, if I understand Councilman Jones's bill correctly, what they're looking for is to be responsive to the community level concern that the PAC does not investigate frontline incidences. And folks want that. They want independent, civilian-led investigations. To the extent that I understand that correctly, that's one thing that I think the councilmen and the council folks who are working together on this, and I'm inspired by the fact that the 13 members really working hard together on this, are suggesting is necessary, that we have the ability, the power, and the resources to be a frontline investigator for, I'm not sure what level of complaint, but certainly civilian complaints and other misconduct as they prescribe. And of course, I would imagine there's going to be some conversation on funding and how that can be fully baked into the process. I'm not sure of that, but I would imagine that based on what exists in other jurisdictions, that this city council will at least consider guaranteeing some funding based on some calculation of the police department's budget. So that's all I know for now, but I encourage you to all stay civically engaged. Definitely vote for it in November and hopefully in favor of it. And to tune in on Wednesday, there's city council hearings on this, where I imagine there will be much deeper discussion on that.
Danny, do you have other questions, other comments?
Actually, yeah, if we have time, there was someone who asked, if the PAC is only has the power to recommend and the police have the power to decline that recommendation, what power does the PAC have?
Yeah, so this is the one I get often. So I think a lot of power. All right. So one is, as I mentioned, the police department has to respond and provide and articulate a reason why they are saying no. All right. So that's important, because if the average resident, although they should get a response from the police commissioner, sends a recommendation, I don't know that they're compelled to receive one. So that's an important one for me. And also, the levers that exist in city government, as I mentioned already, include the mayor, the city council, and the residents of the city. So our reports are public, which is another important power. The residents of the city have been very supportive of us as the city council. And when they see our recommendations, they can say, you know, the police department said no to this, and we don't believe they should have. And we are going to question them come budget season, or question them directly on this, and demand that they reconsider their decision. So I think it's a good point. I can't force any change, but I do think that what we can do is bring issues into the public discourse and make sure that the folks who have the power to put more pressure, whether it be the residents on this call or the city council or the mayor, do assess the response and determine if they think it's valid or not.
And as we wrap up, we want to highlight the notion that the ability to bring these issues to the public and shine a light on them is what makes a difference. And so we appreciate all of you joining us tonight. Civic engagement is hard, but we all need it. Our next meeting is Monday, July 20th. I guess we're not sure whether that's in person or by Zoom. More on that as we see what happens with the pandemic in Philadelphia. But for tonight, we wish you all peace and safety, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.